Well, hugs Mark, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me again. This time around, we have another question by a person going by the call sign Miguel99171. And this is a question or a couple of questions in the comments section of the video I just put out, answering another question, which is great because I love answering questions. It gets me thinking and it helps me as much as it might help you. Hopefully it helps you and helps other people too. So what is this question that Miguel asked? He said, I'm assuming it's a he, could you make a video explaining the book of Revelation? It seems to be a very misunderstood book, and things like the Antichrist and the false prophet, are they real? Essentially is what he's saying or what he's asking. Or are they invented and misinterpreted by Christians? Now, I know what he means by that. If somebody's inventing something, you would hope that they kind of know what they're inventing, but I know what you mean. So that's a lot to answer, and that would take a series of videos stretching on for a good few months to say the least, and I'm not going to do that because it will be Torah that will be the delight of the Yetzer Hara. What I mean by that, I mean that if we embark on a whole series understanding the book of Revelation, that's going to take us away from learning Torah that would be much more beneficial for us to learn, to improving ourselves and enabling us to live as righteously as we can, rather than just filling our head full of knowledge about the coming cataclysms and the transformations that are ahead for mankind. Although it's important to be abreast of them and to know what's going to happen, as much has been revealed in the scriptures, it really should play secondary to learning Torah, to essentially do tshuva and to live righteously. So we want to be very careful that we're not sort of taken away by topics because of their intrigue, and be distracted by the things that we otherwise should be working on. And this is one of the most effective attacks of the Sitra Hora, of the dark forces. But with that said, I'll do my best to give you my understanding of Sefer Gilyana, that is the book of Revelation, and we'll talk about the Mashiach Neged, the false Messiah, the anti-Messiah, and the Navi Sheker, the false prophet, and we'll look at a few other things along the way, hopefully. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is that the Orthodox Jewish world, as I'm sure many of you are aware, do not accept the what is called the New Testament as being emet, as being true. They see this book as being a fraudulent document, and so they are forbidden to read that book to gain any gleanings, unless it is to refute missionaries or heretics, and this is indeed some of the roles that some Orthodox Jews play, particularly in the area of Jews for Judaism, to counter the missionaries, Jews for Jesus, and all these other groups. And so, according to Jewish halakha, if a book is questionable in terms of its translation, if some of the translation of the manuscript is definitely questionable, it is forbidden to study, to glean insight. And we see this with the book of the Maccabees, which is normally found in the apocryphal works between the book of Malachi and the first book of Matthew. And in the Jewish world, this book is not something that is passed around. You won't find it in an Orthodox Jewish bookstore. Does that mean that the events of Hanukkah are not studied and not praised and recalled by the Jewish world? Heaven forbid. No, of course they are. But they do not use the book of Maccabees. Book of Maccabees 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are books that they do not study, but they do have a lot of Haggadic stories and children's stories surrounding this event. So they're They're never short for having written material and oral material talking about specific events during this key event in Jewish history. So it just gives you an example of where the Jews do not hold any credence to a particular volume work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they negate the reality of the event that the work talks about. So it's a very interesting point to be aware of and to hold close to you and to make other people become aware of, because there are so many different translations of the New Testament that it's very hard to try and find out which is a good translation. Even to the point where I wouldn't really comfortably recommend any translations, but there are some that are worse than others and some that are better than others. So it definitely wasn't a story that was made up. There's a lot of interesting information in the book of Revelation to give one more of an insight as to what's going on. But once a person becomes aware of the Torah and the significance of the Torah and the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, of course, begins to shake off their Greco-Roman interpretations of things, that's a book that kind of I wouldn't sort of recommend reading on high rotation. And in fact, I would get other books under my belt, squarely under my belt, before I kind of delved into that book. And what books am I talking about? Well, in the Jewish world, in the Orthodox Jewish world, their kind of equivalent book to the book of Revelations that Christians have, the book of Revelation, is the book of Ezekiel, Sefer Ezekiel. And this is a prophetic work written by a Ezekiel, who was a high priest. He was a Cohen, and he was apprehended by the divine will and received a series of visions and revelations, was commanded to live a certain way for a year, and was revealed a whole host of things that on a surface reading of the book of Ezekiel and a comparison to the book of Revelation, there are what seem to be quite a few contradictions, which is an area that obviously a lot of people cite as putting the book of Revelation into a little bit of questionability. But on closer examination, these reservations that people have to these so-called contradictions, they can be resolved. Because we see in the actual written Torah itself and the rest of the books that make up the writings of the whole Tanakh, there are many occasions where there appears to be contradictions which are neatly resolved if a person's willing to study them. In fact, that's one of the hallmarks of reprimanding a reader of the Torah to study deeper is when there appears to be a contradiction. This is an alert to a student to study the subject on a deeper level. So, so the book of Ezekiel is in many ways the book of Revelation for the Jews, but the Jews also have quite a few other works that are considered books of prophecy, such as the book of Isaiah and the book of Jeremiah. Even the book of Lamentations is considered a work of prophecy, and of course the book of Daniel, which the Christian world make quite a bit of fuss about, which I think is very interesting, because I think they should be just as across the book of Ezekiel as they are across the book of Daniel, but that's my personal view. So, in terms of the concept of the Antichrist and the false prophet, I would do my best to lose the ecclesiastical language as best as I can at this stage. So rather than using Christian terms and frames of references, as you become more knowledgeable of the Torah and the Hebrew language, you would, as best as you can, begin to swap out those terminologies and the Christian handle on concepts with their naming conventions, their ecclesiastical language, as I call it. Because in many ways this ecclesiastical language causes a false picture of something to be manifest over the text that isn't necessarily there. For example, the word church, which appears in the opening of Sefer Gilyana, that is the book of Revelation, the Revelation of Yochanan, one of the Talmudim of Yeshua, who was sent into exile in the penal colony at the Isle of Patmos. And so it opens with the 7 churches of Asia Minor, and this is where ecclesiastical language can get somebody quite wrapped up in something that isn't there, because it simply means there's 7 congregations. And this was chiefly one of the reasons why Shaul HaShliach, otherwise known as the Apostle Paul, went into these areas, because this is largely where the nations of Assyria had settled when they had conquered the 10 northern tribes and sent them into exile. Because it's very much a mission of sifting lost Israel, which was one of the things that the Moshiach, Yeshua ben Yosef HaNazaret, he actually specifically said was his primary mission was to sift lost Israel from the nations. And so this is what it's all about. It's about repairing this fractured relationship and drawing the family back together again. So the Mashiach Neged is the negative Messiah, and one of the things that I find is the most alarming about many teachings on the Book of Revelation that you will find over the web is the lack of time spent on really discussing the negative Messiah, because he's very much a feature of the end time events, and he comes first. What do I mean by that? He makes his appearance on the scene before the actual Mashiach arrives, and he will look amazing. He will look like the best thing since sliced bread. He will put a halt to wars, and he will bring about a period of peace. And even the very elect among the called out ones of Hashem may be deceived into believing in his candidacy or him actually being the Mashiach. There are going to be many things that convince people that he's definitely the Mashiach, and he will be a man of peace, and he will look amazing. He'll look pretty squeaky clean. He will be a man of sort of temperance, tolerance. He will be a friend. He will come across as a friend. As is a shade, a dibuk, they appear as family members, as friends, and the idea is for them to lull you into a false sense of security and get you to commit a sin and iniquity. So it's very much the world, the demonic world, is very different to how they're portrayed in Hollywood, because the idea is that they're to get you to actually invest confidence in what they're trying to do to you, rather than to scare you and manifest in ways that just scare the living daylights out of you and make you run away. This is rather the forte of the Malakim, the angels, when they make an appearance. That's why whenever there's a visual waking manifestation of a Malak that appears before a prophet, 9 times out of 10 they're usually on the floor. The prophets will drop to the floor in terror. So the negative Messiah here will look amazing. And the actual real Messiah, when he comes, he'll be coming as a man of war, with the blood metaphorically coming up to the bridle of his horse, the blood of his enemies, and his talit, his prayer shawl, will have its 4 corners dipped in the blood of his enemies. And it will be a frightening and a devastating and a dark day on the day of Hashem. And so he'll be coming in the clouds with a host to lay waste to a world gone astray. So that's something that's very important to instill in people when discussing about these future events, because without significant information and significant discussion on the Mashiach Neged, you can be actually prepping people for their destruction rather than prepping people to make the right course of action at a future time. So to be very careful. The Navi Sheker, the false prophet, will be in cahoots with the Mashiach Neged, and they will create life in the form of an image, some form of statue, and there will be a mortal wound that is administered to the Mashiach Neged, and he will die and or appear to die, but then come back to life. And then after this time, life will be imbued into the limbs of this effigy, of this statue that was constructed in his image. And this statue will move and then call down fire from heaven and bring about an attack on some of the very elect. And this is very much a revenge for the shame and embarrassment and humiliation of the prophets of Baal at the time when there was a confrontation, for want of a better word, between good and evil, and fire was called down from heaven and killed all the prophets of Baal on that day, which was, many people are familiar with that particular story. Now, speaking of which, the book of Ezekiel is very important to learn. It's very important to study. Now, whereas Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet who ever was essentially, certainly before his passing, he clearly stated to the nation of Israel what their potential was as a nation, and the greatness of the heights they could achieve if they do the right thing. And so that was his one of the sort of main calling cards of Moshe, was to let the nation know of their potential if they just simply do the will of the Creator. And we know that that whole birthing process was, there was a backwards and forwardsing with that. There was success, there was quite a few failures. And so Moshe essentially presented the nation towards their potential, and whereas Ezekiel, he presented the nation the reality of their current circumstance. And so this book here called Ezekiel, it is a Art Scroll Tanakh series. It's a very thick book. Book of Ezekiel is a ginormous book in the Bible. And this particular publication has all the Talmudic and Midrashic and rabbinic commentaries, all the sort of the accepted and most popular and most well-known, all anthologized in one volume with a whopping introduction. And there's even a map of the temple with all the correct dimensions as was revealed to Ezekiel in his vision. You can even get that framed and put it up on the wall, which if you can see it there, and there's a little bit of a key there, and it's called the master diagram. And unfortunately, there is a movement within the Messianic world and some Christian circles that deny that the temple has any more relevance or place in the kingdom, which is an insane view, and means that a person really has to throw out the entire book of Ezekiel if they believe that heresy, that apikorism. So there were three things that the nation of Israel had to do no matter what on entering the land. And the three things that they had to do, these three prerequisites, there were three commandments which Israel was to fulfill upon its arrival in Eretz Israel, three commandments with which the destiny of Israel was inextricably bound: to appoint a king. Okay, so that was number one, they had to do that. It had to be from the tribe of Judah. To exterminate the Amalekites, all the Amalekites needed to be completely erased, removed from mankind. You couldn't make friends with them. You couldn't convert them. They had to be removed from the land of the living. A person might say, well, that sounds like genocide, and the answer to that would be that is exactly what it is. And it is sanctioned by Hashem to have them completely removed if they are from the nation of the Amalekites. Amalek. And somebody might say, well, that's a bit much, that's probably, hasn't God changed? And I would say to that, that's going down the very route of Marcion the heretic, who spoke of a wrathful God in the so-called Old Testament, which he coined. He came up with those two concepts, and the new and improved, warm and fluffy and fuzzy and friendly God in the so-called New Testament. But nothing could be further from the truth. The idea behind nations being entirely wiped out comes about through a transgression and iniquity that occurs way back in the early origins of the formation of that nation. For example, with Lot and his relations that he had with his two daughters, which was unlawful to do at that time. that gave birth to two nations that became very much at different times became a thorn in the side of the nation of Israel and caused them quite a bit of grief. And so when a person engages in an illicit relationship, incest or something of that nature, and offspring occurs due to that relation, it causes Hashem to be involved with that act of immorality by causing him to bring down an neshama, a spirit, into the body of that baby that has been formed from that illegal union. And so it's quite a bad thing to do. And as a consequence for those misguided actions, that baby is born, grows up, has a family, has children. Those children grow up and have families. They grow up, they have children, they have families, and they give rise to more families until before long an entire nation of people that came by way of an illegitimate relationship and grew up in a family which was not really keeping the Torah central to their life. And Hashem staves off his wrath throughout the ensuing generations, ends up seeing that nation that has been born is their sole purpose being to be a potential thorn in the side of his nation when his nation goes astray. So many of the nations that exist today, even though we can't identify exactly who the Amalekite are today, although we can make a few good educated guesses, and of course we can't go on the warpath and go around killing people who we think are from the tribe from the nation of the Amalekites, but these nations have actually been manifest into the world to chiefly be used as a thorn or a rod against the nation of Israel, against Hashem's chosen people, if his people choose not to follow his ways. And we can see that in current days with things that have gone on in Israel and with Gaza and with the border with the Lebanese, Hezbollah, and with Hamas and everything that's going on in Iran. A lot of these nations, it's almost like they simply exist to cause strife to the nation of Israel. And this is very much true. This is very much the case. Their existence is really just for that sole purpose alone. That's why giving them money, giving them any type of aid never seems to sate them. They always seem at the end of the day to turn into a wild man again, and that manifests chiefly against Israel, who are meant to be the priestly class of the world, priestly nation of the world. So I hope I've made that extremely clear. So one of the things was to wipe out the Amalekites. And the final key thing out of the three main things that the nation had to do was build the Beit HaMikdash. Now, to a degree, they did all those things. To a greater or lesser extent, they did all those things. King from the Davidic dynasty as natural and indispensable to the fulfillment of Israel's purpose, as is the natural order of night and day, or the interaction and balance of the atom, the solar system, and constellations to the physical universe. See Jeremiah 38 through 9. Now, many might say, well, it wasn't Hashem's perfect will that Israel have a king over them. That may be the case, but the nation was in a state where they needed to have an earthly king that mimicked the structure of the nations because they were in such a low spiritual state. So they really couldn't operate without some sort of focal point of king over the nation. So this was very much part of Hashem's divine will to make sure that there was a man whose heart was for the nation, and very much so. David Melech was a man after Hashem's own heart, and subsequently his sins, his transgressions, and his tshuva that he did is a microcosm of the entire nation. So usually standout individuals, whether they be the prophets, the matriarchs or the patriarchs, or kings, or great sages, what will happen in some cases is that their lives and the toing and froing that goes on, the mistakes that they make, and the courses of action that they embark on to repair those mistakes, they actually happen to the nation as a whole, and they sort of become mirror images of each other. And so this is a good thing because we have examples of how we can actually go about and repair a broken relationship with the Creator. We can't really do that with the Mashiach because in all the records that we have, we don't really see that he does anything that causes the Creator to be displeased with him. And so that's a very interesting thing. So in a sense, David, we can learn more from David, practically speaking, than we can learn from the Mashiach, who the Christian world believes, and even the Messianic world believes. Because they persistent that he's without sin. He hasn't committed any transgressions. Indeed, in the Jewish world, there are traditions that there have been men and women who have been devoid of sin too, that aren't the Mashiach. So that's a very interesting point. But we know, those of us that are familiar with the New Testament, know there are verses that contradict that. And so this is what we've got to be concerned about. What we've got to avoid is spending our entire lives trying to make sense of the so-called New Testament, the Netzrim Ketuvim, the Nazarene writings, and the Tanakh. And Hasatan loves it when you do that because it steals you away from working on the very thing that you're here for, and that is to identify what flaws, what sins and iniquities that you have, and eradicate them, and return your being in a better state that it came into the world. And that's everybody's individual mission that they have to take on as part of the nation in your capacity. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever your station is in life. So I recommend, if you get a hold of the Art Scroll book of Ezekiel, and just go through and start to read the introduction, because it's really important that you be across the book of Ezekiel very, very much. It goes on to talk about how Ezekiel was apprehended. He was a prophet in exile. He would have been a high priest had there been a functioning temple in his day. And he was commissioned with bringing a message to the nation. And that was to do tshuva. And if that wasn't going to occur, certain things were going to happen to the nation. For example, lying on his side for a year and eating war rations cooked over excrement. So there were quite a few bizarre things that the Almighty commanded Ezekiel to do, and how he chose to live and how he was living, to be an example for the nation in allegory of actual taking on physical actions. We see the same with Hosea, in Hashem commanding him to marry a prostitute. So in some cases, the Almighty will actually call upon a prophet to actually take on a course of action, which will have within it, as that course of action takes root and begins to have the consequences unfold, will contain allegory of a coming event or a past event, and to try and get the nation to realize and to see through that allegory of action and symbolism where they've gone wrong and how they can fix it, how they can fix things. There is the famous Ezekiel's wheel, so it's very much like a close encounter of the third kind, meaning that there's not just a sighting of an unknown aerial entity, it's a sighting and an apprehension and a contact, which is in the UFO world was coined back in the 70s, I believe, as a close encounter of the third kind rather than the first or the second kind. So I think I've whetted your appetite enough for you to maybe start studying the book of Ezekiel. And that was my purpose in answering this question about the book of Revelation. I would be across to the book of Ezekiel, and I'd be slowly going through the prophetic books of the Tanakh, and I would have that as a secondary area of study behind the study of Musa, which is the study of learning right character, refining a person's character and right ethical behavior, which is going to be the thing that is going to be most prevalent in everybody's judgment is how they conducted themselves on small matters as well as great matters. One of the good things about learning Musa is you'll slowly become aware that small things that you know are wrong, that you overlook, can sometimes be the worst things over a lifetime of an individual and cause a person to face quite a brutal judgment, because these are things we don't really feel any kind of guilt over, because they're only minor sins, minor transgressions, and so over a lifetime these things literally accrue and just fill up. And so learning books such as the Mesil Yeshurim, the Path of the Righteous, or the Path of the Just in particular, I encourage you to get a hold of the version that has been translated and commentated on by Rav Victor Miller, who is a absolutely phenomenal contemporary Jewish sage who spearheaded the Musa movement in the US and spread it throughout the Jewish world at that time. Doesn't pull any of his punches, is a straight shooter, and will tell you exactly what the emet is on a subject. He's a compelling man to listen to. There's some rare video of him floating around on YouTube and across the web. He recorded quite a lot of audio cassettes during the 80s, and this is how a lot of these books have come about, through transcribing the audio cassettes based on shiurim that he did on various classic works in the Jewish world. So make sure that this stuff, Miguel, the person that sent me the question initially that I'm trying to answer in this video, make sure that this type of material is front and center in your learning, because everybody's going to have an encounter with the Mashiach. It's just a question of when, whether you live to see that great and terrible day where the Mashiach actually arrives, or whether you're called home sometime before then. We want to be called home in a state where we're found trying to improve ourselves, to do tshuva and reconnect and repair and to restore and to overturn and to take off the mileage of all the things that we've done wrong over our lives. This should be our major concern when going to the scriptures and learning, not just learning things for the sake of knowing when certain things are going to happen. At the end of the day, a lot of these things that are going to happen aren't going to be positive ones, because the idea is that there's going to be a transition and a shake-up, because the world has for too long gone in a direction that Hashem has abandoned and is displeased with. And we've grown up in that environment and grown used to it, so it's normalcy for us. So we don't see a lot of the things that Hashem is enraged by. We are in turn not angered by these things. So some things that Hashem is angered by, we don't have that same anger. And therefore that shows a disconnection between us and the Kadesh Baruch Hu. We're not fully aligned and fully attuned with him because we don't love what he loves. We don't truly love what he loves, or the length and breadth of what he loves. Maybe we love some things but not others. But there are other glaring things that we should really be disturbed about that we just don't disturb us. The LGBT community, things like that, it's being openly celebrated in major cities across the world. These are things that we should tear our garments over, and we should be screaming and crying out against. But we're just used to it, and so we find ourselves to a degree sort of up to our nose in a lot of this filth, not because we're necessarily engaging in it as well, but we're just tolerant of it. And this is going to be directly in proportion to how we're going to be shocked and put out once Hashem begins to unload his full wrath upon the world. Just trying to think of what else I can talk about. Just going a bit more through Sefer Gilyana, the book of Revelation. It opens with the 7 congregations, and I briefly talked about that. It's congregations, not churches. Church denotes some other thing. It's congregations. This is all part of a running conspiracy or plan for the church to replace Israel by putting in different language that denotes something that isn't there. And so a lot of these congregations had good things about them, but they had some things about them that needed to be fixed that weren't correct. Then there is some prophetic events start to unfold on a kind of a plagues of Egypt scale, but rather than just being unleashed on a nation in Egypt, they're unleashed on a global scale. So we begin to see bowls, seals being opened, and the bowls of wrath being poured out on mankind, with rivers turning to blood and things of that nature. Creatures coming up from the bowels of the earth, and some quite horrific things, locust swarms and things of that nature. So study the Exodus of Egypt, the 10 plagues, and that very much is a microcosm of the macro event which is soon to come with the unfolding of these plagues. There's talk of the seven-headed dragon allegory or symbology. We've got the Peshat is always at work in the text, or the Paradis, which is always at work in the text, which is made up of the Peshat, which is the plain meaning of the text. And then we have the Remez, which is the hinted at meaning. Sorry about that. There are my notes flying over there. Just take them off, and I've just taken half of the light cover off with it. It's okay. We can put it back on. And then we have the drush, which is the typology, or the actual symbology of text. And then we have the sword. So we have the Peshat, we have the Remez, we have the drush, and we have the sword. And the sword, of course, is the secret meaning in the text. But yeah, to do a video going through the book of Revelation, there's so many other videos out there that cover it. I have another video called it's a Weird Hebrew Tales book on the Golem. If you get a chance to have a look at the video on the Golem that I did, the Weird Hebrew Tale one, that tells you a lot about the Mashiach Neged and the Navi Sheka, and about the construction of the abomination that makes desolate. And that's probably would be a good video for you to watch if you want to know more about the book of Revelation. But I don't want to repeat a lot of that material in another video. I'll put it out, it's out there. It's accessible, you can get a hold of it, and I recommend you watch that. I hope this video helps. I hope you found it informative, and until the next video, bye for now.